from Vilnius conferences, and from too many conferences. I respect you very much, and it's great honor for us that you participate with very, very interesting issue. So microphone is yours.
Okay, I'm humbled by your words. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Let's see, can we share my presentation? So my welcoming screen. Okay, do you?
I see your screen, yes.
Okay, now you're supposed to see.
Okay, push. Okay.
Yeah, you're supposed to see full screen.
Yes, yes,
right?
I see full screen, yes.
Okay, very well, thank you. Now, to warm up, I'll serve you some worn out phrases warmed over. So, the vast majority of cultures do not exist in isolation within closed, homogeneous communities. The studying of a culture implies examining its connections with other cultures, the way they interact, intermingle, perhaps fuse together, or on the contrary, drift apart. Rather than being static, cultures change and evolve. Rather than being clearly delineated objects, they manifest their protean character and fuzzy boundaries. This gave rise to the concepts of multi/inter/cross-transculturality. These concepts address several specific areas, such as comparisons of different cultures, results of cultural interactions, cultural traits that transcend individual cultures, and more. My present purpose does not require that I address distinctions between them. Without losing sight of other cultural issues, my aim is to examine how this plays out in music, with a special emphasis on the pentatonic pitch collection. My chief example will be the composition Hadedas for cello and piano by the Serbian composer Srđan Hoffman, but I will also adduce examples from other genres, styles, and regions. In doing so, I largely and sometimes loosely borrow concepts from Gilles Deleuze, including his collaborative works with Félix Guattari. And generally speaking, Deleuze is a philosopher who will dismantle any ossified identities, a philosopher of becoming in an affirmative way, dispensing with the Hegelian labor of the negative. With Deleuze, we can look beyond the narrow confines of a single culture at what it might become, at its rhizomatic connections and productive encounters with the other, its unpredictable future states. The Mexican-American philosopher and artist Manuel de Landa and a handful of other authors will also contribute. An important notion from my introductory paragraph is that elements of a culture can transcend its boundaries or be shared by other cultures, sometimes almost worldwide. Let's hear some examples.
You can't gang with me, fair Ellen, unless you do this deed. Unless you saddle me my horse and bridle me my steed.
Have you heard that? Is sound okay?
Yes, sound is okay. Everything is okay.
Next example. Okay, and the next one. No. What do these examples have in common? We can identify several things, but I will zero in on the unhemitonic pentatonic collection. The pitch content may include some embellishing extras or only a subset of the collection. Intonations are non-tempered by default, but basically we can recognize pentatonicism as their core pitch organization. The sample could easily be expanded to the Americas or the Slavic world. Making such an observation presupposes the notion of the pentatonic scale as a theoretical construct and the adaptation of indigenous intonations to the 12-tone equally tempered system. Furthermore, I have used the term subset from Alan Ford's set theory, even if set analysis is meant for an entirely different repertoire. This may be questionable, but for the time being, I'm satisfied that I have selected a certain set of concepts and a certain toolbox to produce a certain interpretation. We could even say that I have produced a certain reality of the composition. Clearly, this is just one way to examine this sample. What is missing from the picture are the cultural contexts in which this music arises. A culture is an organic unity in which every element becomes meaningful only in relation to all other elements, right? Well, things tend to become more complicated. A culture can indeed be understood as an organism, and yet its elements can be freely detachable. But even if they can be detached and made to function in another culture, that still doesn't make a culture a mere collection of elements. A culture must have some stable, well-defined properties. How else could we produce any description thereof? Yet, we cannot adequately describe them until we examine their tendencies, becomings, and rates of change. Here is where the Deleuze-Guattarian concept of assemblage, as used in 1,000 Plateaus, or in Delanda's assemblage theory, can help us. A culture is an assemblage. Assemblage is a whole, but such that decidedly diverges from Hegelian tradition, where a whole is totalizing, where parts lose their independence and are defined in terms of their belonging together, the relations of interiority. A totality defined by interiority is not decomposable, and everything is subsumed under one general idea. In contradistinction, an assemblage must contain heterogeneous elements. These elements must connect in some ways, but at the same time retain their independence. They can be detached from the assemblage and plugged into a different one, possibly obtaining a different function. These are relations of exteriority. Parts interact, otherwise it would only be a collection. Properties arising from these interactions are emergent. They are not fully predictable, and they are immanent to the assemblage that is not governed by a transcendent instance. They are contingent. They do not occur necessarily owing to their inner essences that must be realized, to some kind of Aristotelian causa formalis. An emergent property disappears when parts stop interacting. And if the property is immanent to the parts, it means that it belongs neither to any one individual part, nor to some abstract totalizing whole. They are immanent to elements as a multiplicity, the one-many. Deleuze and Guattari's favorite example is a swarm or a pack, and Delanda calls it population thinking. In interactions, parts exercise their capacities, which are virtual, but must be actualized for an assemblage to be produced. Note the distinction between capacities, properties, and possibilities. Properties are indeed defined by their belonging to the whole. Possibilities are an a posteriori phenomenon. Once an event is realized, we can deduce its prior possibility as something waiting to be realized, pre-existing in the form resembling that which will occur in reality. As opposed to that, an important feature of the virtual is its non-resemblance to the actual. This guarantees creativity, the production of something new. An added value to the concept of assemblage is revealed in the French original, agencement, as it contains the word agent or agency, stressing the mobile, dynamic character. If culture is not a totality, but can be more fruitfully viewed as assemblage, then pentatonicism as a cultural feature can disentangle from its original cultural context and enter into many other assemblages, gaining different social and cultural meanings, and meanings beyond its acoustic and experiential facticity. Effectively, that is what makes transculturality possible in the first place. It can also lose its cultural significance and become no more than an acoustic fact and listening impression. When I put the label pentatonic collection on the examples I played, I have turned the living cultural activity into a theoretical abstraction. As such, it is located within the field of theoretical discourse. And while this field is highly diversified, hence possibly qualifies as an assemblage in its own right, it still possesses a certain level of homogeneity, which would sooner fit the Deleuzian term stratum. Why pentatonicism proved to be so versatile and to have the capacity to enter into numerous assemblages is the question I will not deal with. Others have done that more or less convincingly. Instead, I'm moving on to our next batch of concepts. The strength of connections between elements in assemblages is variable. So is the intensity of their interactions, the stability of their relations, the predictability of the emergent properties, all of which constitutes coding. We must always bear in mind that codes are immanent to the assemblage. With a low intensity of interactions, no assemblage can come into existence. If there is little variation, if the assemblage requires a relatively stable identity, we can talk about a highly coded entity, which would amount to the creation of the aforementioned strata, bearing in mind that strata have other dimensions as well. The process of solidifying or stabilizing connections within an assemblage is territorialization. Again, a concept that goes beyond its spatial and material connotations. Territory must have boundaries, yet cannot be totally closed within itself. There are lines of escape, lines of flight, ligne de fuite in French. These lines enable deterritorialization. There are pathways out of the given territory, as well as tendencies and forces that carry us along these pathways. Our pentatonic examples demonstrate the deterritorialization, reterritorialization process. Pentatonic scales are indeed territorialized in a literal sense. Their different varieties have strong connections to certain well-defined spaces or territories. But at the same time, the character of the scale is nomadic, another important term from Plato's, as they territorialized on many different locations. To follow this process further, we introduce Josip Slavensky, a Croat by birth, German by distant origin, Hungarian by schooling, Serb by affiliation as professor at the Belgrade Academy of Music, self-identified variously as a Slav, South Slav, Yugoslavian, Balkan, Oriental. There is some transculturality for you. He hails from the Međimurje region, now in Croatia, with strongly pentatonic musical tradition. Songs for My Mother, for string quartet and contralto or baritone, is a particularly captivating example with melodies that are probably his own, but closely following demotic characteristics and with authentic folk texts. It's not this. Since pentatonicism is part of his musical culture, and since we often conceive of culture in terms of ethnicity or region, no significant changes have occurred in that sense. The music remains strongly tied to the soil from which it grew, But from another perspective, the song, complete with its pentatonicism, certainly entered into a different assemblage. While not wholly uprooted from its original milieu of the peasant culture, it becomes at the same time part of the culture of the concert hall. Deterritorialized from its rustic origins, it is reterritorialized on a work of art. Here we are dealing with another level of complexity. Pentatonicism is now deterritorialized to the extent that not only is it not associated with any specific song, rather with an idea of folk music in a more abstract sense, but it involves a double deterritorialization, where the melody is deterritorialized from Slavic as well as from American culture, such as Dvorak encountered during his sojourn in the United States. With the Mussorgsky example, a similar thing occurs with a new assemblage created from deterritorialized Russian tradition and also deterritorialized Western functional harmony. The difference with respect to Dvorak can be tentatively defined as follows. Dvorak is probably at home, quote unquote, with Western harmony and form, into which he incorporates ethnic traditions. Mussorgsky seems to be searching for ways in which to adapt functional harmony to the needs of Slavic tradition. It would be fair to say that he goes some way to overcode the highly coded system of European functional harmony. We turn now to my principal example, the composition Hadedas by Sergen Hoffman. We'll hear the beginning. The composition bears the subtitle Presentation and Three Developments, and indeed it is a four-movement work. However, the first movement, Presentation, is as developmental as the subsequent movements, indeed more so than the third one, or the second development, written in the form of theme and variations strongly redolent of the chaconne. The first movement, while definitely not a sonata allegro, at least presents some contrastic materials, subjects them to elaborate developments, and at certain points returns to them in their more recognizable forms. The third movement, with its variation form and slow tempo, easily qualifies as the inner slow movement in a typical four-movement cycle. Add to this partial recapitulation in the last movement, and we get something vaguely reminiscent of a 19th century sonata cycle. Except that the musical language largely contradicts this idea, and so do many formal features of individual movements, except the third. I do nonetheless recognize this formal analytic approach as legitimate. We can talk about deterritorializing the chaconne, the sonata cycle, and the like. Arguably, the true presentation can only be ascribed to these two first lines of the score. As this example shows, these chords, brief moments frozen in time, hardly leave an impression of temporal unfolding, and we need this cello passage to initiate the true musical motion. The chords are given Alan Ford's labels, but upon closer inspection, we discover their richness beyond what these labels can capture. The first pentachord is actually the pentatonic collection, which also contains a fourth chord. The hexachord is composed of the fundamental A and its partials up to the 11th one, the tritone. Its literal pitch content is identical to Scriabin's Prometheus chord. Well, almost identical, for where Scriabin features F sharp, alien to the harmonic series. Hoffman corrects this, quote unquote, and adheres to the harmonic series proper. We further widen the scope of associations by noting that this 014 tetrachord is ubiquitous in post-tonal music, and that the octatonic scale is one of the favorites of many 20th century composers. Generally, what is striking about this beginning is not so much the music in itself as the plethora of its implications. The possible associations are abundant, but at the same time hardly recognizable, and this makes this beginning perceptually and semantically opaque. The initial chords, on the one hand, define many subsequent events, and on the other already carry a momentous historical and cultural baggage transformed beyond recognition. Nor can we ignore references to functional tonality, tenuous as they may be. What can the analyst do with this material? I already traced the path for traditional formal analysis, but promised I will not pursue it. I used Fort names initially simply as a convenient way of labeling pitch collections. Convenience lies in the fact that certain collections recur, but they are transposed, reordered, presented horizontally or vertically, and the Fort sets capture their common traits. Can we take it further? After all, this is basically a non-tonal piece for which set theoretical analysis has been devised in the first place. Conducting a thorough set analysis throughout the entire piece does not yield significant results. We come up with too many sets, not to mention the ambiguities of segmentation. Yet we can appreciate certain relations, especially subcomplex relations. I cannot go into details now. Suffices to say that we do discover a coherence and logic in pitch structure, even a logic of goal-directed processes, which otherwise is not really the strongest point of set analysis, not Fort's forte. Next, we turn our attention to the following three things. First, we have identified moments where vertical sonorities form weakly tonal progressions. Second, some of these progressions span larger portions of music and even encompass the entire composition. Third, these vertical sonorities are often horizontalized. Does this warrant a kind of prolongational analysis? Is there sense in producing graphs like this? Again, there is no time to discuss this. I stand accused of unwarranted deterritorialization of prolongational analysis and its inappropriate reterritorialization, which is tantamount to plunging into chaos. Admittedly, this analysis has serious caveats, but it still says something meaningful about this music. And what it says is by no means identical to the set analysis or to formal analysis, even if in certain ways they converge. What we try to achieve with these analytical sketches is to draw attention to the fact that different analytical approaches can construct different realities. We also understand that we need to tread cautiously when reterritorializing analytical methods on the material they were not meant for. This may bring about productive encounters, open novel perspectives, and the creation of new assemblages, new territories, but pitfalls are there as well. The analytical process can reach the dead end of establishing excessively coded, ossified relations with no new insights, or on the contrary, fail in decoding or overcoding and end up with more chaos than necessary. While chaos itself to some extent conforms to its meaning in everyday parlance, it is a concept much richer and will be treated later in this talk. To address the issues of transculturality in a more restricted sense, we'll first consider I'm trying to get rid of this. Yeah, okay, very good. So. So here is the force. And this Prokofiev example. Obviously, the pitch content of this stacked perfect force is identical to the pentatonic collection or subset or superset thereof. But quartal sonorities do tend to have a life of their own. Apart from setting up certain interior implications and expectations, some of which are subsequently realized within the composition, they form exterior relationships with other cultural contexts. Prokofiev brings a bonus, quote unquote, by incorporating the tokens of primitivism into sophisticated orchestral textures. Perhaps we could broaden the circle of associations and include music featuring parallel perfect fourths as possible association. Oh, let's hear this one. Good. Now back to pentatonics proper. It is very important to reiterate the perceptual characteristics of the first chord. Suppose that after all, some extremely fine ear could really hear this chord as pentatonic. The lucky owner of such an ear might say that this recognition territorializes the chord in a way. Territorializes, I mean, on the field of theoretical knowledge, but it still remains culturally rather neutral. Compare this, for example, to Jack Bruce's riff. We can immediately recognize the cultural context if we have a little bit of experience with this music. By the time that the pentatonic scale has reached this stage, it has undergone several de- and re-territorializations, from Western Africa to African American work songs to blues, hence blue notes, to rock. In the Hadedas case, any such connection is severed. Even when later in the piece, the collection returns in a different guise. Here we can see that. It still does not commit itself to any specifically pentatonic cultural context. The collection is totally deterritorialized. The initial structures are dismantled to the point at which anything can happen, and in some situation, we need some kind of regularity. Deleuzian Guattari's term is the refrain, again, an idiosyncratic use of words. Elizabeth Gross defines it as a rhythmic regularity that brings a minimum of livable order. The refrain is requisite for the creation and sustenance of territory, and pentatonicism plays an important part in that process. The initial, I dare say, confusion of associations and implications invites the activities of the refrain, establishing of the code, solidifying of territory. This perceptual and semantic opacity begs analytical interpretation. The analyst can remain within the curve of the Western concert hall, or broaden the scope and search for sometimes unexpected connections. Different analytical approaches illuminate various facets of the work that could in turn be assigned to different cultural contexts. But the claim I'm making is even stronger. Cultural affiliations are constructed by analysis. Why do I say constructed rather than illuminated or uncovered? It certainly has something to do with specific relationships between artistic creation, perception, and analysis. First, we must deprive the creators and their intentions of their special privileges. As the prominent theorist of social systems, Niklas Luhmann, says, even the artist can see what he wanted only upon realizing what he has done. The work of art possesses a degree of independence even from its creator. It speaks back to him. Then we introduce the analysts. Discussing a composition by Brahms, Theodor Adorno, in his study on the problem of musical analysis, highlights the role of analysis in the composing of music. One sees how music in itself would be unthinkable without the analytical process which preceded it, says Adorno. Later in the text, he would claim that an art aware of itself is an analyzed art. Musicologist Leo Treitler puts it even more bluntly. The work of art has no existence apart from any interpretation of it. This statement already has considerable epistemological and also ontological implications. If we follow them, we can engage with various schools of thought. For instance, within the framework of Husserlian phenomenology, there is no denying the existence of the material world outside ourselves, but phenomenological reduction brackets everything else and concentrates on the pure phenomenon, the object of intentional consciousness. Ultimately, everything is traceable to Immanuel Kant, for whom the objectively given world of experience is unknowable and inaccessible, and it is the transcendental subject with its a priori forms and categories that effectively creates it anew. The way we construct the reality of the world at large is replicated on a smaller scale in the way we make sense of music. It is then not difficult to see how the meaningfulness of music resides not in its materiality, nor in the relationship between its elements, nor in the experience of the listener, but somehow floats on the surface of all that, or in between them as a medium for their interactions and mutual transformations. I will now proceed to examine how this plays out in the context of my Deleuzian reflections on pentatonicism in Hades. I will first ask, can the composition itself be called an assemblage? Perhaps it is closer to a stratum, but in a weak sense, yes, given the diversity of its materials and techniques, the capacity of the materials and techniques to go beyond what is actualized in the piece and enter into new assemblages, and they're two different instruments. This concept, however, can be put to a better use in a heterogeneous assemblage made of sound, both its materiality and its expressivity, and the performance, and the listener, and in this case, the analyst. Incidentally, every attentive listener is a proto-analyst, and every analyst is an enhanced listener. The borders between them are fuzzy. In such an assemblage, the composition's material components can retain their relatively stable identities and can function in other contexts, but only in the assemblages of this kind can they produce any kind of musical sense. They become a meaning-producing process, a meaning-producing machine. A piece of music in itself, observed in isolation, has undergone a degree of territorialization, since its boundaries are generally clear and they bring certain order into the material, but as such, it would be all but meaningless. It acquires meaning, complete with its cultural references, by forming an assemblage with listeners and analysts. for which it must undergo certain deterritorialization, a loosening of its boundaries. Lines of flight must open it to various modes of listening and interpretation. The relationships between these elements, or agents of the assemblage, as well as between sub-elements within the composition as part of the assemblage, need to solidify enough to form a new territory. If there is no territory, nothing to guard us against chaos, the music is once again meaningless. Narrowing again to pentatonics, we take it to be deterritorialized. It is partially reterritorialized as used throughout the piece, thus becoming a sort of refrain or code. From the analyst side, deterritorialization must have occurred prior to analysis, and the analyst must have reterritorialized the abundance of empirical pentatonicism on a more abstract level of theoretical knowledge, where the pentatonic scale is a theoretical construct. But then the analyst needs to decode the beginning of the composition in order to re-territorialize it on the experience or analytical description and interpretation. Engaging further with Deleuzian ontology, we already know that territory gives a sense of purpose and acts as defense against chaos, which tends to engulf us, like black holes from which we cannot escape. Chaos, however, is not a nothingness, but a virtual containing all possible particles and drawing out all possible forms, not absolute disorder, but a plethora of orders, an infinite number of particles moving at infinite speed, vanishing as soon as created. Chaos is something that art, philosophy, and science must confront. It is not only that we cannot escape chaos completely, we must not shut it down. No creativity without chaos. The artist puts a bit of chaos into the frame in order to create a composed chaos that becomes sensory. Extracts vibratory rhythms from the fluctuating, self-differentiating structure of the universe in order to harness the cosmic forces, to render invisible forces visible and inaudible forces audible. They put a sieve over chaos. The field of intensities arises, a field of interacting forces, a dynamic field of densities, velocities, heat, defined by differential relations, that is the rate of change of these parameters. These processes can reach certain remarkable points, points that constitute thresholds or singularities, around which all that is individual is constituted. Extensive musical structures, the composition as fixed in the score, existing in the Euclidean Cartesian space-time, with their measurable durations, countable bars, determinable frequencies, delineated sections, arise from the field of intensities, velocities, forces, energies. The dynamic flow of matter energy crystallizes into audible musical events. Crystallization applies to entire individual cultures as well. The artist is the one who is the chief bearer of responsibility, but it is the same chaos that founds the artist, the listener, as well as the analyst. They part their ways when individuation takes place, but only to rejoin in a meaning-producing assemblage or machine, so that effectively they converge. They collude to produce a field of meaning which neither one nor the other alone could produce. This is how Delanda sums up the process by means of ontological dimensions, from virtual, chaotic, through intensive to extensive. Since the world is not pre-segmented into categories, everything begins as undifferentiated, continuous whole, defined by intensities. Deleuze and Guattari borrow from Antonin Artaud the term body without organs, which could also be called the state of ultimate deterritorialization. Body without organs becomes segmented little by little, and organs are created. We can now add an additional layer to thinking about the initial pentatonic chord from Hadedas. We are well aware how fleeting it is and how opaque to our perception. I speculate that the virtual forces that shape both individual cultures and individual works with the pertaining analysis seem to be frozen in time at the very moment of actualization. It is no longer an undifferentiated mass, nor is it a fully fledged musical event that we really make musical sense of. It is virtuality captured at the moment of actualization. This bears some resemblance to Deleuze's concept of the crystal image, derived from Henri Bergson, presenting an image of the object and its potential and one at the same time. For my part, I cannot help by thinking of this freezing time as an insect captured in amber, a nod to my colleague Violetta. She will understand the importance of amber. We have seen the beginning of Hadedas not as something that is merely there, a given entity, but something to which we can possibly ascribe the eons of human history and a multiplicity of human culture. It forces us to rethink the relationships between nature, let us not forget the harmonic series, as a natural occurrence, and history, and how one transforms into other. But it is only possible if we problematize and analyze it in a certain way. And while it would be preposterous to deny music, human cultures, or generally the world, the existence outside our minds, neither can we be mere passive recipients of whatever influences the world exerts on us. We listen, we analyze, we reflect on, and without that, cultural references cannot gain their actuality. What also cannot escape our attention is music's extraordinary predilection for multiculturality. By now, we have seen various ways in which it can be manifested, and I will add a couple of examples more, showcasing deterritorializations and reterritorializations, again, pentatonicism in question. What an amazing series of de- and re-territorializations. In the true nomadic spirit, it was not only, the pentatonic said, not only deterritorialized from whatever cultural context in which it functions, it is deterritorialized side, we call it. But please confirm that you are listening, that you can hear me.
Yes, we listen and we hear everything, okay, and also presentation.
Very good. Now, but when the Japanese composer coded it into his song, it may not have been at all the case of the pentatonic scale coming back home. For this type of anthemitonic pentatonicism is not so characteristic of Japan. It is rather the Japanese embracing the Western version of themselves. Some Western tonal harmony is added into the mix to make it more palatable for Western markets. On top of this, the title has nothing to do with the song, but sounds Japanese enough for Western consumers. Although these transformations can be hailed for their production of novelty, all this ultimately ends being coded into a stratum of popular culture with very little creativity, very little by way of chaos. And of course, with the increasing role that China plays in the world, we need now to learn the anthem of the Eurasian Union. So that's how will that sound. So in the process of examining our sample of compositions with a strong focus on the pentatonic pitch collection, Deleuze, with or without Guattari, refracted through Delanda's lens and with a significant boost from some other scholars, was of great help in offering a specific perspective on the relations between heterogeneous cultural milieus, individual compositions, composers, listeners, and analysts, highlighting the production of any sort of meaning as a collaborative effort of all these agents in ever-changing arrangements. The concept of territory, which, while recognizing its material and spatial character, is affirmed as a process of transforming materials so as to make them expressive and creative. All this with a grounding that is non-systematic, non-totalizing, condensed to the point of inscrutability, yet in its way rigorous. For all this, we are aware that the intricacies of art and culture can never be fully grasped, remaining forever intrigued by music's unique ability to bring together what is extremely disparate. I will reserve the last portion of this essay for a considerably different perspective, a psychoanalytic one. The claim is that of all the arts, music is closest to unconscious processes, characteristic of the early infantile mental function. It has something to do with the fact that sound plays a very important role at the earliest stages of individual development, indeed in the prenatal period. Now, time proves to be very elusive, so I will just run through a few theses. So, the roots of music are infancy and the prenatal period. It is ruled by the primary process, which is unconscious, preverbal, part of this archaic experience is permeation of oneself in the outside world. We don't feel the boundaries between ourselves and our world as infants. Sometimes it is called the oceanic feeling. This has something to do with the mechanism of condensation, one of typical mechanism our unconscious in play. Conflations of percepts or concepts. Now, music bears traits of mental functioning at that stage. Hence, music is closest of all the arts to the unconscious, to the preverbal. Hence, the idea of the ineffability of music. It may seem, a very romantic term, but there's strong reasons to call music really ineffable. Hence, predilection of music for fusing, conflating, and the like. We'll devote to this topic the last sentence of this paragraph, but just to remind that creating or performing or listening to music is conducive to this experiencing of this archaic state of mind of our being permeated with the world. These are the moments known as the aesthetic peak experience. So, need to wrap up just one final sentence. If through music we can achieve the feeling of being absorbed by the work of art, of the dissolution of our own personal boundaries, and of becoming indistinguishable from the surrounding world, then why should we be surprised if music, in addition to all its culture-specific traits, possesses capacities to transcend even transculturality itself and dissolve even the boundaries between the human, the animal, the mineral, the divine, and the cosmic.
Thank you, dear Miloš, for this fascinating presentation. And I think that your participation has made this event a success. We look forward to seeing you at our next congress, also as a keynote. Now I want to ask the audience, we encourage you to ask questions. So after each presentation and now, so if anyone has a question, if not, I have a little comment and question. So too many examples, too many brilliant examples. And I wanted to ask a little question. You had an abstract, such kind of word, umbrella word for transculturality is an umbrella word for multi, inter, cross, transcultural issues. So, and I understand that you use it as umbrella word, but can you explain us the differences between multi, inter, cross, trans? I mean that you're not only educated musicologist, but you are very wise musicologist and researcher. And it's very interesting, your opinion about this umbrella word, transculturality, and what is the difference between all these, how to say, terms, multi, inter, cross, and trans?
Anyone who knew that because actually you cannot find a consensus of the exact meaning of this term. But basically, I use transculturality because this element of transcending or going beyond the boundaries. So since that was the most important part of my presentation, I use transculturality, emphasizing this possibility that certain cultural elements transcend. Cross-cultural would probably mean something like crossovers, like combinations which produce something, and multicultural it will be embracing several cultures at the same time. This would be roughly the meanings, but precisely because I'm not very comfortable with these distinctions, I never went into that. And as I said, it's really, for what I'm trying to say, it's basically doesn't really matter so much to distinguish between them.
Okay, and I have another question. I know as the musicologists who do not support transcultural issues, transcultural research. So, and they have their reasons maybe. And do you think that it's problem of debate? So, I don't know what do they mean exactly, but some of them argue about this term, and they think that transcultural issues and research, it's not natural, and they do not agree with these research, and they are against the transcultural research. So your attitude to these words, so transcultural studies, what do you mean? Is it normal?
It may be the reason why this happens. Maybe I naively believe that sometimes it's an innocuous reason that you're simply focusing on a specific cultural traits. But more ominously, let's not forget political agenda.
Yeah,
I know that very well. The 1990s in Serbia, all of a sudden, everyone wanted to produce some kind of orthodox spiritual music to be inspired by, and that's how it became, these brass ensembles, which gained great popularity, and they're now identified with Serbian culture. My grandfather, when he was born at the beginning of the 20th century, he never knew about these types of ensembles. They came with German and Austrian occupation in World War I. So that's how. And the typical, insisting of Aksak rhythms and augmented second is definitely something which is shared with Albanians, with Bulgarians, Macedonians, the Turks, of course. Probably going back even to, I don't know how back. I'm not really quite sure about it, but and it became really outrageous what our really very distinguished musicologist said. It's just this pseudo folklore and pseudo orthodoxy was something really, like a cancer on the tissue of Serbian music. So don't underestimate political agendas with these identitarian politics. I mean, there can be really bona fide interest in that, but sometimes there is something more sinister lying behind that.
Maybe they think that it leads us to globalization and to eliminate identities and features of identities. Maybe this is their argument that this leads to globalization and it's not good for identities. So they have their very strike meanings and position. They are against some ethnomusicologists. They are against transcultural issues and research. So have any questions, please, if you have them.
Can I? I absolutely agree that music transfers all over the world. And I have another example from Poland that using pentatonic scale was very popular in Middle Ages. Of course, there was no major minor system, and people used different systems, and pentatonic scale was among them. And till now we have wedding songs from Middle Ages, and people sing it. Okay, but
the Gregorian chant sometimes highlights precisely pentatonic collection within the modes.
Okay, but what Gwansa started to broad this subject, what are reasons of this transcultural situation for music, is, according to me, is very important. There are probably political reasons, there are historical reasons, as I mentioned just before, but maybe there is also another reason for this, and I think it could be tendency, trend in or among composers to do some compositions and do not other kinds. For example, I think that in postmodernism, there are, at least in Poland, and I know there are some composers who mix different technical devices or issues, like, what was his name? Serdan Hoffman. I could give you name, for example, Rafał Augustyn and some others who do it as a kind of summarize of of this 20th century, for example. They want to show in one piece of music how creative 20th composers were, and they mix all these devices. So maybe fashion among composers is also one of the reasons.
But you can really do this in, like, you know, there is a famous piano piece, probably the best piano piece in Serbian music by my professor, Vasilij Mokranjac, where an Orthodox chant really, you know, sort of springs out of music very naturally, and it rises up, and it's really a fantastic experience. Another possibility is to just have this montage idea. Here is like, you know, Luciano Berio for a symphony, or well, it's just called a symphony, I believe, or things like that, where you just juxtapose various styles and genres. That's probably the most typically postmodern. And then you have, I think, you never hear either this or the other in Hoffman's piece. It is so covered, so, as I said, very inscrutable. It's really the analysis which uncovers all these possible associations. You don't really hear them. But once you discover them, many worlds open up to it.
In some other compositions, these different devices, even pentatonic scale, is well heard. Just you showed us such example where we cannot hear it, but other composers show us this. Okay, thank you.
Thank you again. And I was thinking about Ambrosian chant, not only Gregorian chant, also Ambrosian chant. And there are too many coincidences between Asian music and Ambrosian chant and Gregorian chant. We all know that too many rhythmic modes and melodies traveled from Asia to Europe, and maybe we're talking about common things for European nations. And Dia Violeta said about that you work in Asian music, we in European, but we can find coincidences in both cultures, in Asian and in European cultures, too many coincidences. And maybe it's connected with consciousness. So we are human beings. We are humanity. We are, how to say, inhabitants of this earth, and we have the common consciousness. Of course, diversity in identities, but we have much in common. So this session, also this day of our document, that we all have much in common. So if anyone has a question or comment, please.
Raising hands.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Guanza. Miloš, thank you for your great presentation and the ideas, especially accompanying with the examples. Just as you know, Guanza broadened the discussion, but I would like to especially ask you through the transcendentality term. Do you think whether to see these pentatonic scales within that much broad area might be a consequence of biological predisposition?
That's a very interesting topic. The genesis of pentatonic scales, I don't know if they are really, I mean, I'm not really an ethnomusicologist, but these ethnomusicological classics like Kurt Sachs or Fritz Bose, they made a case for, you know, universality of how it arose. It initially as infrapentatonic scale, which is a subset of the, to use this terminology, and then how it developed. There might be some kind of predispositions. I won't really commit myself to a definitive answer.
Yeah. Thank you.
Certainly must be a reason, but we don't have, at least I'm not aware of a neurological basis for that.
Yeah.
Perhaps someone has figured that out, but I'm not familiar with that. So
yeah.
somebody digs it out. Very good. I'd be glad to hear.
Yeah, so I read a book about tuning systems from 2005, Cetares, which is really a very prominent scholar in this area, especially music theory and then tuning systems. He wisely connected this kind of especially subsets, like because we you know that we solve scales as a subsets of temperament systems, because we pick that pitch and then we try to like scale it, and then we try to conceptually create some syntax between that subsets as well. So he said that maybe there is a biological predisposition because
I wouldn't rule that out.
Yeah, because of like making it conceptually easy, making especially to understand music, which really captured me in terms of idea. Maybe another reason for the transcendentality, we could say that we might say that biological predisposition, or the working analogy of the mind
as a transcendental condition for this sort of arising, this sort of musical configurations. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I want to add something. So when we are for example, discussing organums, the first organums, we emphasize that all people use the fourth and fifth, and it was very biologically, it was organic, and why fourth and why fifth? So because it's natural for biology, for our biology, fourth and fifth. But when I asked about this pentatonic one Chinese researcher, I don't remember his name. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But he answered a very interesting answer that five is a symbol of our solar system, and our pentatonic is based on the solar system. So everything that is in universe is based on these 5 stars. Solar system, and these 5 notes, and in this pentatonic is a result of this thinking and perceiveness of the universe. We all know that all nations have their perceiveness of universe, and sometimes the notes in scales are a result of this perceiveness. Even a Christian scale from do to do, re mi fa sol la si do, it's also connected with Christianity. Descending, not ascending, not descending scale. So maybe everything is connected also with our mentality, with religious and faiths and beliefs, and biology, of course. Thank you.
Just when you mentioned this Chinese interpretation, the very moment I thought, yeah, okay, it may be so, or is it perhaps post factum interpretation of something that already had existed for I don't know how long time.
Yes.
I'm not sure about that.
So, okay, if any questions, and I think that
I can only add something to your discussion, that the systems, Chinese and European Christian, and so explaining 7 or 5, these are symbolic presentations. And I think we are at this level of knowledge now that we can really look for biological basis. And I remember one ethnomusicologist, Kubik, who made research in Africa, and he wrote that everything comes from aliquots. There are 4th, 5th octaves, and we choose from them and create scales. His explanation. Thank you.
Yes.
Which
Everything
then
comes
makes it
to-
very difficult to account for certain parts, including parts of the former Yugoslavia, this Dinaric region comprising parts of what is now Croatia and Bosnia and Montenegro and going to Serbia, where you have like some kind of non-tempered seconds as perceived points of stability, and that's something totally weird. But anyhow, okay, we could go on with discussion forever.
Yes, thank you. So first is biology, and then people try to explain it with symbolism, with religion, with beliefs, but the basis maybe is biology and our possibilities as species. So thank you very much again. It was fascinating. And I see since our session comes to an end, and we have a little break, short break, very short break. And we have the next 3rd session at 6 o'clock. Oh, at 6 o'clock. So we may start the 3rd session. And I want to ask the chair of this session to start the next session.
Gökmen Hocam, siz yapabilir misiniz yine? Alper Hoca ve Sevda Gürel Hoca var. 2 kişi var bu şeyde. Oturum başkanı olmadığı için.
Hocam sesim geliyor mu?
Evet.
Herkese merhabalar. Evet, şöyle öncelikle yapacağım sunumla ilgili şuradan hemen bakıyorum. Ekrana yansıtabildim mi bilmiyorum. Ekrana yansıdı mı Sayın Hocam?
Evet hocam, evet.
Tamam. Şimdi öncelikle böyle çok kısa bir İngilizce bir özet geçip daha sonra Türkçe sunum yapmayı düşünüyorum. Hello, my name is Alper. My surname is Şakalar. I'm an associated professor in Kahramanmaraş Sütçüman University Fine Arts Faculty Music Department. And today I'll tell you about digital applications and digital technologies for vocal training, and what are the importance of these applications and technologies. The integration of digital technologies in vocal education has revolutionized teaching and learning practices, offering both educators and learners a transformative approach. The application of systems like vocal analysis and feedback tools have facilitated an objective, measurable, and personalized learning experience, ensuring that the unique nature of every voice is accounted for during training. These technologies have transcended traditional methods that often relied on subjective feedback, providing a scientific foundation for evaluating vocal features such as pitch, resonance, volume, and frequency. Voice analysis systems such as Pratt and Voice Vista play a pivotal role in identifying the strengths and areas of improvements in a learner's vocal capabilities. By utilizing data-driven insights, these tools enable learners to hack their progress over time and refine their techniques in a structured manner. Additionally, feedback systems offer real-time auditory and visual guidance, which is particularly effective for beginners, helping them to achieve precise vocal adjustments. Yes. Sorry. Beyond individual training, digital technologies have proven invaluable in group settings, such as choirs or vocal ensembles. Systems like Yamaha Harmony, Director Analyze, Group Harmonization, ensuring cohesive and balanced performances. These tools empower educators to pinpoint discrepancies in group dynamics and provide targeted interventions, enhancing the overall quality of collective outputs. The accessibility of digital tools has also widened the scope of vocal education, breaking geographical and economic barriers. Online platforms and mobile applications allow learners to engage with high-quality resources and expert guidance remotely. However, challenges such as digital literacy gaps, cost of advanced tools, and the risk of prioritizing technical precision over artistic expression remain significant. It underscores the necessity for a balanced integration of technology with human-centered pedagogical practices. Future directions in this domain should explore enhancing the artistic and emotional dimensions of vocal training through digital tools, while addressing access inequalities and fostering inclusivity. By leveraging the strengths of technology alongside traditional teaching methods, the field of vocal education can continue to evolve, providing innovative and equitable learning opportunities for a diverse range of learners. This balanced approach not only preserves the artistic essence of voice training, but also enriches its scientific underpinnings, ensuring a holistic development of vocal abilities. Evet, Türkçe sunumumda da